Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello and welcome to Ticky, Your Money's flagship business show. I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage. And tonight we're diving deep into the vexed problem of women in politics. Who'd be a female politician these days? The recent shock resignation by Kelly O'Dwyer, a minister, and those empowering red pumps that Julie Bishop wore when she marched out of her ministry, carping that she was sure that the party would find a female popular leader if they ever found one. Is affirmative action the answer? Quotas? Or is selecting on merit still the way to go?
Women are not joining political parties at the same rate as men are.
Why not?
They are vacating the political space, and that I think is the root issue that needs to be really addressed.
Well, coming up, we'll show you some more of what Labor Senator Christina Keneally, Federal Liberal Vice President Karina Okotel and the CIS's Eugenie Joseph, and a special interview with Paula Matthewson ahead of her book release on next week on merit. We'll also be bringing you up to speed on the latest body language around Fed Chair Jerome Powell as he leaves rates on hold, but with rather more sensitive market demeanour. First, let's go to mining. Now, have a look at this. The horrendous human tragedy and environmental disaster that Brazilian miner Vale is dealing with after a tailings dam collapsed, killing 84 people so far, but with over 250 still missing. This tragedy is all the more unbelievable given that it comes as Vale and joint venture partner BHP are still dealing with the physical, emotional and financial reparations of the Samarco dam disaster from 2015, never mind the reputational damage from that. The Vale chief executive, Fave Schwartzman, had already decommissioned 9 upstream tailings dams as a result of Samarco. But this latest dam was not one of them, I don't think. Indeed, it had been given the structural thumbs up only a couple of weeks ago. Mr. Schwartzman now says Vale will spend about $1.9 billion decommissioning another 19 dams. He said, "We decided the company should once and for all do what it takes to remove any doubt about the safety of Vale's dams." Well, the whole incident, as I say, a terrible human tragedy now unfolding. There have been 5 arrests, 3 Vale staff and 2 consulting engineers. But there are so many questions that are being asked around the world in the mining and investment community. Is this a Brazilian problem where safety is just lower than elsewhere? Why, after Samarco, didn't the checks reveal weaknesses? I remember clearly asking J.S. Jacques at Rio after Samarco what action he was taking at Rio, and yes, the checks were there, and there were more checks. And what will this latest disaster do to the ongoing sensitive negotiations between BHP and the Brazilian government? Well, the whole incident has also caused a big jump in iron ore prices. That's because Vale is now having to cut production by 40 million tonnes over 3 years. Vale's global competitors, Rio, BHP and Fortescue, have all seen their share prices rise as a result. So no surprise that the first question analysts had for Fortescue CEO Elizabeth Gaines delivering her quarterly results was about Vale. Well, I caught up with Elizabeth Gaines after her results, Fortescue posting a 5% rise in quarterly iron ore shipments to over 42 million tonnes, with higher exports underpinned by a 4% on-year increase of ore mined. The results also showed new sales of higher grade product as well as an improvement in the value of its cargoes. Shares closed up almost 4%. For more on those results, I sat down with Fortescue CEO Elizabeth Gaines a little earlier. Elizabeth Gaines, well, the market loved the results, I guess, but dominating your share price and outlook really is the knock-on from the latest terrible Vale dam collapse. Puts volatility in the iron ore price, but it changes the game in terms of supply, presumably, from Vale. What's the impact on your business, do you think?
Well, Ticky, firstly, I think everyone at Fortescue, extends our deepest condolences to everybody at Vale and in the community being impacted by this terrible tragedy. I think it is a bit early to really speculate on the longer-term impact on supply. Certainly, Vale have come up with some statements that they're going to decommission a number of dams through their operations, which will have an impact on supply, but they think that they can partially offset that with additional supply from other parts of their operations. So a little bit early to really tell in terms of what the longer-term impact will be. But I think really importantly, before this event occurred late last week, we were already seeing that very strong demand for our iron ores, and we were starting to see that narrowing of the spread between the price of a 65 grade product, for example, and a 58 grade iron ore product. So those trends were already occurring in the market, and we've seen a very strong start to this calendar year.
All right, just before I come to your operations, you were asked today, though, about these upstream tailing dams that are in Brazil. I mean, as a punter, and we'll know more, obviously, but it seems extraordinary that more wasn't done now with hindsight about getting rid of decommissioning all of them, really. Do you think there is a difference in safety standards between here and Brazil, and the way Australians operate and the Brazilians operate?
Well, look, I think we're yet to find out exactly what was the cause, Ticky. Look, certainly from our perspective, we have tailing storage facilities for our ore processing facilities, and we have three tailing storage facilities, 2 of which are ex-pit and 1 that are in-pit. But none of them have been constructed using the same methods that were used in Brazil. So I think that's, for us, is the key issue. I think yet, as I said, we're yet to really find out exactly what happened and what was the root cause of the issue.
All right. As you say, going to the results, everyone's looking at China, obviously. You've had Greg Lilleyman, your CEO, he's just been up in China. What is he saying about the steel mills up there and the levels of profitability which have come down?
Well, I think we've been seeing that since the end of the quarter, so really much more strongly in the first part of this, or the last few weeks of this new calendar year. So the steel mill profitability really started to be impacted towards the end of December. So, you know, with that, we've actually seen steel mills respond very quickly, and they are very agile. So when they see their profits come under any pressure, they really look to their input costs and look to lower their input costs. So we've seen very strong demand for our iron ore. We've seen a reduction in inventories that have been held in ports across China. So we've really seen those that market really change quite significantly in a matter of just a month or so.
Do you see that trend continuing, right, favouring the bulk of your iron ore?
Well, difficult to predict what's going to happen with certainty, Ticky, but we do know that steel mills are very sensitive to their profit margins. Yeah. Last year's profit margins were at abnormally high levels, so as those margins have come under pressure, and they're still making money, but their margins are under pressure, and we've really seen that response. And there's a bit of a difference between whether they're producing flat products or long products, and certainly the construction and infrastructure that's still occurring in China is at unprecedented levels. I mean, last year alone we saw 928 million tonnes of crude steel production in China in the calendar year, and that was up from 830 million tonnes the year before. So it's about 100 million tonnes more steel that was produced in China last year. That's about the whole annual production of Japan, which is the next biggest producer of steel. And so China continues to go from strength to strength.
Interested that Greg was sort of saying these levels of profitability he would call the more normal levels of profitability.
Yeah, I think over the long term those are the more normal profits that we have seen steel mills. And, you know, there was a period of time where steel mills were loss-making. Last year they had super high profits, but certainly now we're seeing what we would call more normalised levels of profits.
Now, meantime, Elizabeth, your first cargo of high-grade Westport refines, it took off to China in December. It's been a pretty good response. Now, is that 1% of your exports now?
That was just some trial cargoes. We're looking at 8 to 10 million tonnes for this calendar year, for this financial year, and that's against 165 to 173 guidance. But moving forward, importantly, Ticky, with the Eliwana mine and rail project, once that's operational and with first ore on train due in December 2020, we will get to annual production levels of around 40 million tonnes of West Pilbara fines product. So certainly a very important part of our longer term strategy to have that 60.1% iron grade product. And we've seen very good response to the product, to those initial shipments, and we're seeing strong demand from customers in China.
Yeah, and you're looking at continuing sort of diversification beyond iron ore with gold, with copper in South America.
We are very early stages, Ticky. I mean, we're about to start drilling in Ecuador. We're waiting for the final approvals to start drilling on our concessions in the Santa Ana region of Ecuador. And we've recently acquired a small company in Argentina that has tenements in the San Juan region, but we haven't even started exploration activities yet. So those are a very early stage, but we're certainly very excited about the opportunities there.
Now, from a shareholder point of view, obviously, as I was mentioning, share price, I think it's gone up over 30% this year. Could that be right? Now, you've done a share buyback, though, in this last quarter. I'm looking at, what are you now, 5.64 last time I looked at your share price. The share buyback you've done at, what, just under $4, is that right?
That's right, Ticky. It's representing very good value. So we announced a share buyback late in October, and we started buying back shares as soon as we could following that announcement. And we were in the market in November and December. We've been out of the market waiting on the release of our half-year results. But in those couple of months, we acquired about 139 million Australian dollars worth of shares at an average price of just below $4. And as you rightly said, given where we're trading right now, that represents very good value for our shareholders. We've cancelled those shares, so that again delivers enhanced returns to our existing shareholders.
But you're going to stop that now, presumably, at these sorts of prices?
Well, the program runs for up to 12 months, and it's up to $500 million. So
yeah.
we'll look at what offers the best value for us at the appropriate point in time.
OK, all right. Look, also asked today by analysts about this announcement by BHP and Rio Tinto. I don't know whether there's any significance in the timing on your day. They've jointly announced that they'd back, on the Indigenous side, a First Nations voice in the Australian Constitution, also set up a Makarrata Commission. You're not part of that. What's Fortescue's position on this?
Oh, look, I think we commend any business who is also committed to ending diversity and closing the gap. But at Fortescue, that's been the foundation of our business from the very outset, and we've been in operation now for just over 15 years. And we've been committed from the very beginning to ending disparity, closing that gap, and making sure the communities in which we operate benefit from our success. We've seen that through training, through employment. You know, over 17% of our Pilbara operation workforce are Aboriginal people, and we've had a Billion Opportunities program where we've seen over $2 billion of contracts awarded to Aboriginal businesses and joint ventures. Yeah. So we're really focused on those practical measures that we know make a genuine difference to those communities in which we operate.
Right. So, I mean, as you say, you've got a reputation for being very much on the front foot in the Indigenous space, but you're not buying into this sort of constitutional, positioning yourself on the constitutional at all.
Oh, look, I think this is early days. I mean, it only was announced this morning. You know, that's something that we'll consider. But really, our focus is on those practical measures. But again, as I said, we commend anybody who actually is committed to ending diversity and closing that gap.
Finally, can I ask you about the CSIRO joint venture on hydrogen technology? I mean, if the Labor government does get in with its position on hydrogen, this could be a very interesting new sector, I guess.
It could be, Ticky. I mean, this is an important partnership for us. We're a big user of energy throughout our operations, so there are opportunities for us to look to reduce our costs further. But also it could be a very significant commercial opportunity as well. So there's a process we need to go through. The CSIRO have developed the technology. There's further research and work required to really get that to the right scale of commercialisation opportunities. But we'll be working closely with them to really see what we can do in that space. But we think it's very exciting.
Well, Elizabeth Gaines, a very interesting year so far for you. Thank you so much for joining us there in Perth.
Thanks, Ticky.
After the break, does the Fed chair have the markets back, and at what cost? Analysis on the changed Fed hike timetable after this short break.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, let's catch up with news of the US Federal Reserve, where Governor Jerome Powell surprised quite a lot of people with his new dovish tone. The Fed left interest rates steady and said it would be patient in lifting borrowing costs further this year, pointing to rising uncertainty about the US economic outlook.
Growth has slowed in some major foreign economies, particularly China and Europe. There is elevated uncertainty around several unresolved government policy issues, including Brexit, ongoing trade negotiations, and the effects from the partial government shutdown in the United States. Financial conditions tightened considerably late in 2018 and remain less supportive of growth than they were earlier in 2018.
Now, interestingly, policymakers took out the language from the Reserve Bank's Federal Reserve's December policy statement that risks to the outlook were roughly balanced, and that language that projected further rate hikes will be appropriate in 2019.
We continue to expect that the American economy will grow at a solid pace in 2019, although likely slower than the very strong pace of 2018. We believe that our current policy stance is appropriate at this time.
And there's more. In a separate release from its policy statement, the US Central Bank added, while it is continuing its monthly balance sheet reduction, it's prepared to alter the pace in the light of economic and financial developments in the future. All to say that the message now seems to be that there'll be maximum flexibility from the Fed, which has been buffeted in recent weeks by financial market volatility and signs of a global economic slowdown. Well, US stock markets extended their gains following the statement, and bond yields dropped as investors gauge the language adjustment as signalling a low probability of additional rate hikes anytime soon. For some analysis on this decision, pleased to welcome back Chris Weston from Pepperstone, who joins me live from Melbourne. Chris, surprised a lot of people, this slight change in tone?
Well, I think part of it did, Ticky. I mean, I think the fact that they've adopted this universal patient stance, this kind of wait-and-see stance. I mean, we've had pretty much every Fed member coming out over the last 2 weeks and giving us that message. Even the more hawkish contingent, Esther George, for example, has said that the current economic environment suggests that they should be patient with weights and rates, and they should have a sort of hold for now. So I think the idea that they've moved to a universal patient stance is not a surprise. I don't think it's a surprise that they've changed their forward guidance, that further gradual rate hikes needed to happen given their economic projections. They probably should have changed that in December, and I think the markets went into a bit of a tiz in December because they didn't do that then, but they've done it now. What I think has and reverberated around financial markets is that the Mac Daddy of liquidity measures, which is the balance sheet, and what that means for excess reserves, they've shown that maximum flexibility stance, and they've actually said that the terminal rate, which most people in the market had believed that the terminal rate should be, the balance sheet comes down to about $3.5 trillion. It's just over 4 at the moment. Is actually going to be higher than what they'd been expected because of the demand for reserves. So therefore, they've basically said that they'll probably either terminate it early, and if the economy, continues on its current trajectory, not just in the US but globally, then perhaps they'll stop balance sheet normalisation. That leads us to believe that there'll be better liquidity conditions for markets, and liquidity is the oxygen of markets. So it's the balance sheet, the comments around that, which I think has really caught the market off guard there.
Right. Also, I think there's a lot of talk about literally the demeanour of the governor there. He seemed to be quite sensitive, quite cautious. A lot of talk about his pragmatism now responding to financial markets. Do you think that's correct?
Well, he's a slave to financial markets. I mean, unfortunately, that's the situation. The markets wanting to hear a message through October, through November. They didn't hear it. They heard one that was very different, and the market said, fine, if you're going to give us that message, we're going to act. And we saw the markets really dictating how the Federal Reserve were going to see things. They saw this rampant tightening of financial conditions. High-yield credit spreads widened aggressively relative to investment grades. No companies in the debt markets in the high-yield space actually went to market in November and December. You saw obviously a huge drawdown in global equity markets through that Q4 period, and the Federal Reserve had to change their message. So I think the issue was, part of it was that there had been a couple of what now considered with the benefit of hindsight, a couple of faux pas from Jerome Powell, which the market reacted, and then he had to subsequently walk back. In fact, in one case, we actually had the New York Fed president do it on his behalf. So I think he was very much prepared for the press conference. He was prepared for the hand grenades that were going to be chucked at him from the press. And again, this is a Fed president or chair who has slipped up on a couple of occasions, and I think the market was ready to pounce should they hear a message that they didn't want to hear.
Yeah. So how is this going to translate, in your view, to rates through the year?
Well, look, I think the interesting situation here is if you were to draw up a chart of the Fed funds rate and corresponding period or overlap periods of recession in the US over the last 40 years, the textbook or the playbook is similar in every situation, and that is that the Federal Reserve go on a hiking spree. You see an extended period of a pause, followed by rate cuts going into a recession. That's what we see. What is the market saying right here, Ticky? If you look at the Fed funds futures or the euro-dollar futures tradable interest rate markets, they are saying throughout 2019, there's absolutely no, in fact, it's 3 rate hikes or 1.5 basis points or so of hikes priced in for this year. So the market is saying we are going to see an extended pause. If you have a look at euro-dollar futures and what's priced in for 2020 next year, they're actually saying there's 19 basis points of cut. So there's a 76% chance of a rate cut next year. So if you go off this script, which has been a hiking cycle, the Fed overdo things, markets don't like the tighter liquidity, you go on an extended pause followed by a cut into a recession. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be a recession. I'm not saying that's the case, but the rates market is saying that that playbook is likely to play out again and that they see an elevated risk of a recession. That's what we're seeing from the rate markets here. So
do we think going forward, Jerome Powell has learned his lesson from the markets? Will we be literally a bit more sensitive going forward?
Yeah, I think he's learnt. I think he's learnt a lot. In fact, I think if you have a look at what's happened throughout October to December and what he said, and then how the markets have responded and how they've had to actually come out and undo this with communication changes, I think this is going to be a casebook for how markets interact with central banks going forward. I think this is a really interesting period. I think, I think how they've interacted and how market pricing has dictated central bank flows or communication, I think is just a fascinating situation. So I think this is a casebook for everyone to study if you're interested in financial markets. That's a significant situation. So I think he has. I think he's learnt a lot. He doesn't necessarily come from that same similar cloth as Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke. And I think he certainly learnt a lot. But at the end of the day, I think what's happened now with what he said, that we're going to be an extended pause, we could use our balance sheet to greater effect. They're fighting fires. They're fighting fires in a situation that we are seeing. What at the heart of this is still very much, unfortunately, we are seeing a global economic, a synchronised global slowdown. Whether you're looking in Europe, which is probably the worst part of it all. The UK, we still don't know the fallout of Brexit. We've obviously seen slower growth in China, and there's been concerns about that. And in the US, we're still seeing signs of slower growth there. So at the end of the day, the epicenter of this is a concerted or a synchronised global slowdown. And what has effectively happened from central bank policy there is one of fighting fires, not necessarily being proactive and getting in front of that. Yes. We need fiscal policy as well, but they're fighting fires at the moment. And the rates market's telling me a pretty clear story here.
All right, as you say, a fascinating sort of change in strategy from the Fed chair.
Absolutely.
Chris Weston, thank you so much for joining us there.
My pleasure, thank you.
Now, after the break, the 5G race is on, with Optus today announcing its inroads. We'll get more from Paul Budde next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Yes, welcome back. Well, Optus has flicked the switch on its first 5G plan as it moves to compete with the NBN. The Canberra suburbs of Dixon and Monica will play host to the company's first locations to trial the new network. Optus says the Huawei ban has not affected operations. The CEO of Australia's second largest telco says while Optus had to adjust its 5G network, it will still provide a globally competitive service.
Gradually, over the next 14 months, in capital cities across Australia and in regional cities, we will be bringing this Optus 5G home broadband service as we deploy 1,200 base stations by March 31st, 2020.
Well, of course, a lot of action recently in the 5G space. Earlier this week, TPG announced that it would be shelving its plans to establish a 5G network following the government's crackdown on Huawei, which also is not allowed to build a 5G network in Australia. For more on what's happening in the telco space in particular, Paul Budde joins me live at the desk. Love it when you get down here. Nice to see you. Now, Optus, this is an interesting move, isn't it?
Absolutely.
A bit of a first mover advantage, should we think, over Telstra?
Yes, I think so. In any case, they get the PR out of it, and the service that they offer is a competitive service in competition with the NBN.
Yes.
Obviously, it's restricted. It's not countrywide. It's only a limited sort of area. Yes. Equipment for the users is not yet available, so we have to wait and see exactly how that pans out. What's the cost and things like that. But I like the announcement. I like competition, so yes. This is great. Yeah.
You think of Telstra really as being the company in the position to
yeah.
build out fast.
Yeah.
They might have been sort of sidelined slightly, but presumably they will be a faster rollout when it comes, will they?
Yeah, Andy Penn has indicated in the past that he believes that 30% of the broadband market is basically open for competition with 5G. So he obviously shares the sort of optimism from Optus that we saw today. So I'm pretty sure that there will be good competition between Telstra and Optus in the 5G space as an NBN service. But once again, we have to be very, very careful to the customers, because it might take 5 or 10 years to build out a whole network. Yeah? So it will be in selected areas, as Optus has indicated, and it will take quite some time before you get really a national coverage of this service.
A lot of news, as I was saying. The news on TPG, that is really interesting, isn't it? David Teo
yeah.
deciding, and we can now see the impact of Huawei everywhere.
Yeah. It's. I think that while that's true, I also very much believe that was a nice scapegoat. It's a nice excuse.
So you think this is all about the ACCC?
Yeah, I know. I think more actually looking at the merger, absolutely.
Yes.
But I'm looking at is that you've got TPG, you've got Vodafone. They're going to merge. Why would they want two mobile networks? Infrastructure, yeah. So it doesn't make economic sense for TPG and for Vodafone to do that. Furthermore, they indicated they could roll it out for $600 million. That's absolutely impossible. It cost $1 billion, $2 billion to roll it out. So the economic sense of the fact that they're not going to roll out the network, I think is much bigger than the excuse that Huawei can't deliver. I mean,
right.
It has been banned in other countries, and so far no telco has indicated that they are affected by it. Even Optus is saying that it's not affected by it.
Okay, now going to this proposed merger between TPG and Vodafone, which should be, by all rights, clearer now from Rod Sims's point of view, you would think. But you think there could also be some leverage that Rod Sims might ask as a requirement, a condition for that merger?
Yeah. What the ACCC is all about is about consumer protection and competition.
Yes.
That's what they want, nothing else. So if you take away the 4G network that Rod Sim has indicated, that was great for competition. He liked that network from a competition point of view. So in that particular situation, you're taking out the competition. So how is Rod Sims now going to guarantee more competition in the mobile market? The only way is what some of the operators have already asked for 20 years, is open up the market for wholesale. Have a wholesale regime on the mobile networks. Now, what TPG might want to do is they might want to be what's called a virtual mobile network operator, a VMNO.
Yes.
That is something that TPG could do on the Vodafone network. They buy capacity, and then they could, if they want, still operate at $10 sort
Which
of
was
offer
what
they
was
had.
so deadly for Telstra when TPG was doing it.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is a merged Vodafone-Telstra, if nudged by TPG, if nudged by Rod Sims, could end up in a model a bit like Qantas Ansett.
Yeah, it could, and that would be the preferred.
Qantas Jetstar, is what I mean.
That would be the preferred situation. You've got then the premium one, and you've got a challenger. So we want to keep TPG in the market as a challenger. They've done a fantastic job in the telecommunications market in Australia. Yeah. So we want to keep them, and Rod Sims want to keep that sort of level of competition going. So if we can twist that in one way or another, via a virtual mobile network operation, then you still have great competition in the mobile market.
Now, I spoke to Andy Penn earlier this week, and when I put to him that sort of scenario that Rod Sims might require that as part of the merger, with a knock-on effect potentially for Telstra having to do something as well, he wasn't particularly interested in that sort of thing happening. He said, well, no, I mean, that's their affair, that's their merger. He didn't sound like he was keen on the whole thing.
No, and I think there will be great opposition both from Telstra and for Optus. But the alternative, what's the alternative? Rod Sims want to see that the competition is safe in Australia. If TPG and Vodafone are going to merge, we've got less competition. Whatever way you look at it, we've got less competition. So the only way to actually, one of the only ways, there might be other ways, one of the ways is to open up the mobile network. So if that happens, it will be an absolutely interesting discussion and battle.
Who are the players who would really benefit from that?
There are approximately 10 MVNOs at the moment in Australia. There are perhaps a little bit more. They have
names like Virgin,
Boost, Virgin, but also, you know, Amazon, you know, that's the biggest one of the lot. But you've got also Aldi and Coles, who are in that sort of area. So they would like to see lower prices. Now, for the last 20 years, these companies have asked the ACCC, please step in. We want better wholesale services. To give you an idea, Ticky, over the last 20 years, the mobile market share of that group of players has been 1, 2, 3% and hasn't changed over 20 years. So the wholesale arrangements that these companies are getting is shocking price-wise and rules-wise. So these companies can't really grow based on the current regulatory situation where there is no obligation from the network operators to actually provide a better wholesale service to those other players. So that might be now a battlefield, because it will definitely be a battlefield that you know, could be opened up, and that would be very interesting to see how that happens.
Right, we'll talk to you about it when it does. Paul Budde, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
OK, well, the coalition goes into this year's election as the underdogs. That's pretty clear. They've got a few problems, but one of them has been about women in politics. We've had allegations of sexism, bullying, a slew of resignations from the Liberal Party itself. Think Julia Banks and most recently IR Minister Kelly O'Dwyer. And then there's the growing appeal of the independent candidate. So what on earth to do? Quotas? Targets? Labor introduced the affirmative action rule in '94. Today, nearly half of all federal ALP MPs are indeed women. But the Liberal Party doesn't believe in quotas. It's always argued that candidates should be pre-selected on merit. Under the current pressure, though, there is a change in mood among some Liberals. Paula Matthewson, in her new book titled On Merit, discusses all this, and she says Julie Bishop's red shoes she wore when she finally threw in the towel may well end up being a catalyst for change. For more, I spoke with Paula a little earlier. Paula Matthewson, in your book, you kick off with Julie Bishop. You use her actually through the book as well. These red pumps that she wore on her resignation, they're so significant in your view.
They are, not only in the fact that, you know, red is the sign of rebellion.
Yes.
But also...
Notice your necklace, by the way.
Oh, yes, that's right. So it's my sign of a bit of solidarity today with Julie Bishop. So Julie Bishop being unsuccessful for the leadership was a pivotal point for the women in the Liberal Party. It basically demonstrated to them that the whole talk of being appointed on merit or progressing on merit was a complete sham. That if someone like Julie Bishop, who had all of the credentials to be leader, was only able to garner...
And the popular...
And the most popular
vote.
Contender for that particular role,
yes.
Was only able to garner 11 out of 85 votes from her own peers, that there was something else at play rather than just merit.
Now, what is interesting is that it would appear that Julie Bishop herself, the woman who was able to stare down Putin, the woman who definitely can cut it, she appears to no longer be convinced that merit is actually working as a way to bring women into the Liberal Party. Would that be fair, or would she deny that if I put that to her, do you think?
She would probably deny it. I mean, she's been very careful about talking about the issues within the Liberal Party without, you know, denying that merit works.
Yes.
Because in an ideal world, merit would work.
Yes.
If men in the Liberal Party were rewarded on merit.
But her comment, her sort of side remark about the popular woman...
Well, that's right. One day they'll find a popular woman with merit to lead the Liberal Party.
Yes, they haven't found one yet, clearly.
Apparently not. Apparently not. And so that's her point. And that point is that if merit was actually used to progress men or women in the Liberal Party, then there would have been a better chance of her being appointed as leader or elected as leader. But merit isn't the way that people progress in the Liberal Party, or all parties more generally. It's about factions and who you know and branch stacking.
Well, you go very strong. You say, yet even when confronted with the evidence, I must say your book is a sort of liturgy of who rose and who fell, and it is quite overwhelming that when the women come up, and even when the women did come in a wave under Turnbull, they seem to get replaced with men, most of them, when they left. You say, yet even when confronted with evidence that the Liberal merit principle is little more than a protection racket for men, many Liberal women have remained committed to it.
That's right. And that comes back to Liberal philosophies. So Liberal Party, or women in the Liberal Party and a lot of Liberal supporters believe in this concept of individual freedom, right of the individual.
And if you're good enough, you'll be rewarded.
Right. And if you go back and look at things that Julie Bishop said when there was only one woman appointed to Tony Abbott's cabinet, she was saying then, I don't consider myself a feminist, I don't necessarily believe in the glass ceiling, because I believe that if I try hard enough, I will get there. And I think the events of August last year demonstrated to her finally that that's not actually the case.
Now, what about the situation of Julia Banks, for example, this idea of bullying and intimidation? What are we talking about when we talk about bullying and intimidation, and how is it different from men being bullied during these sort of very hot campaigns?
I think a result of the hyper-masculination, I guess, of the Liberal Party, as more and more men have replaced women within the party, or women have just given up and decided not to either go for pre-selection or run for roles in the party. The hyper-masculination of the party has made things like intimidation and degrees of bullying a normal way of doing things, and it may well be a normal...
the cut and thrust, the pressure, which is, well, that's the last time you get pre-selected, or so much for the Prime Minister coming to your seat, in the next few weeks, or, these are all things that are not specifically female, are they?
No, they're not, but I think it's in the translation, really. So the way that you treat your colleagues with respect or not. So, sure, there will always be the rough and tumble within politics, but I think when you then address that with comments like, oh, you should roll with the punches, or...
And then you mentioned the factions. So you say in your book, several of the young Christian family men whose names were mentioned in relation to the alleged intimidation also happened to be factional heavyweights in their respective state Liberal organisations.
So, people won't name names because of defamation laws in Australia, but they've been fairly consistent in describing the types of men within the Liberal Party.
And has this led to a hollowing out of, would you say, the sort of more moderate Liberals, women?
Absolutely. And that's something that's actually happened since the Howard days.
But all the way through to Kelly O'Dwyer.
And that's right. So,
which is, I have to say, a really sad resignation. So it spoke more than just of this merit versus quotas thing. It was another issue, wasn't it?
Well, indeed, because Kelly is... she was the youngest ever cabinet minister. She was the first cabinet minister to have a child as a cabinet minister. She was one of the very first women to hold a treasury portfolio for the Liberal Party, so she had these kids and she was doing it all. And now she's decided that she would rather raise her family. So. She was striking all these blows.
She was under attack too. I mean, when she was on preg leave, she was under attack.
Absolutely. So there were people who were trying to run other candidates against her. There were even people, when she was running for pre-selection, saying, well, how are you going to be a full-time politician and remain married? She was actually asked that question by pre-selectors.
So what do you think the chances of the Liberal Party actually dropping their merit-based strategy towards women?
I think they can keep their merit-based system and apply quotas, because that's really what Labor Party has done as well. So when the Labor Party imposed their quotas, they just didn't do it in a vacuum and pick up any woman off the street and pre-select her.
Yeah.
They also built this infrastructure around it. So Emily's List and other organisations that identified women of merit.
Yes.
And then fostered them and helped them through the pre-selection process, so that when a quota was brought in and imposed, there were high-quality women to be imposed through that pre-selection
Meanwhile,
process.
we've got Liberal women who have resigned now, who are now running as independents.
Yes, and that's a sign that the women of Australia have had enough.
Are they going to get in, these women, do you think?
Well, those that run in safe seats have got a chance, and it'll really come down to whether they can make a connection with the electorate and whether they can do preference deals.
Yes.
So, it will really need Labor to run dead, as they did in Wentworth.
Yes.
So that would have to be an agreement with Labor to run dead to ensure that they came third, and then other preferences to be worked through. I mean, politics is a dirty business, but that's the way that these independents will have to be elected.
Finally, what do you think is going to happen with Julie Bishop? What's she thinking?
I think she's going to stay until after the election and then make an assessment.
Really?
Yes. She doesn't want to give her seat up to the Conservative men who are circling in the WA Liberal Party at the moment, because Conservatives are the dominant force in the WA Liberal Party. If she leaves, she may lose control of that seat, in that a man might get the seat. So by staying until after the election, she can then make a judgment. Is there a new taste for Liberal moderates? And could she be the leader of that new
so you think she could have...
Liberal
I mean, if
Party?
there was a wipeout, for example, she could have another crack at the title,
I think she could. If the Australian voters say, by electing these independents and voting against Conservatives, Liberal Conservatives, that's a sign that they want a more moderate Liberal Party. And Julie Bishop would be the right leader for a moderate Liberal Party.
Well, it's a really interesting book. Thank you very much for coming in, Paula Matthewson.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And you'll find Paula Matthewson's new book, On Merit, on the stands on the 5th of February. After the break, we'll find out what, if anything, is the upside for women in politics. My panel with Christina Keneally, Karina Ogatel and policy analyst Eugenie Joseph. Next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Back to the issue of women in politics. Now, the Centre for Independent Studies today held a deep dive panel discussion on the pros and cons of gender quotas in politics and whether the tides need to be changing for the Liberal Party. I moderated this morning panel. We had the Vice President of the Liberal Party, Karina Ogatel, Labor Senator Christina Keneally and a policy analyst, Eugenie Joseph from the CIS. It made for a very hot debate. Here's a little bit of what went on.
Will we have quality politicians? Will we have politicians of integrity, of honesty, politicians who represent their electorate and are ingrained in their community? I think when it comes to the ballot box, those are the real questions that voters will be focusing on.
But do you
think so
people mind
that
we're talking about the Liberal Party now with really a very low turnout of female politicians? I mean, stating the obvious to say there is a chasm of difference between Labor and Liberals now. Now, whether it's to do with their strategy or not, we can talk about that. But do you think the electorate out there is beginning to think that just on the numbers, this look is not working, and it's not working for the Liberal Party?
Well, I have to acknowledge Labor in terms of focusing and framing the issue on one of lack of female representation amongst the Liberal Party. And that, I suppose, is a space where the Liberal Party really need to step up and say good quality representation is more than gender. And that is perhaps something that has been lacking. I mean, if we do
But do you think it matters? So long as we've got good MPs, do you think it matters if they're 100% male? I mean, is it an issue at all for you?
I think personally, when I look at who is representing me, I don't look at their gender. I look at who they are as a person, what their character is, what they can offer in terms of policy and driving that, their intellectual capacity and contribution that they can make. I think if we are going to talk about identity politics, and I hate identity politics, so it's very hard to do so, but let's try it on for size. The way that Labor have framed this debate about gender politics is one where they suggest, and very cleverly, that the Liberal Party are somehow sexist because we don't have the same number of female representatives in Parliament. And if I do try on identity politics for size, we could say the same about, well, hey, when we look at female representation amongst Labor MPs, well, what about women of colour? Is that something that should be looked at? What about people of colour across the board when it comes to Labor's representation? And therefore, if there is a lack of people of colour who are on our parliamentary benches on the Labor side, does that mean that they're racist?
Okay.
Well, I would suggest
Christina,
not.
do you want to pick up on that? Because, I mean, look, this is the political story, obviously, Liberal versus Labor at the moment. And so I thought I'd knock it on the head straight away.
Well, Labor didn't raise bullying allegations against the Liberal Party. Linda Reynolds, a Liberal MP, and Lucy Gachui, a Liberal MP, and Julia Banks, a then Liberal MP, they raised those allegations. You know, Labor hasn't been the one pointing out that the Liberal Party's target of 50% representation by 2025 isn't going to be met. Maurice Payne is pointing that out, and Julie Bishop is pointing that out. So these aren't, you know, this isn't something that that Labor has created. It's something the voices of Liberal female MPs speaking out, and you know, it's not Labor's fault that we set in a quota in 1994 of 40% of our winnable seats being contested by women.
But Christine, do you see that?
And that's been successful.
Yes. Do you see that as the reason why there is now the difference? Because I mean, I'm sure you would acknowledge that Labor is not a bullying-free zone.
You know, I've had one of the benefits of working at Sky News was that I got to know a lot of Liberal MPs and people on the Conservative side more than I did before. And, you know, one of them explained to me that, you know, part of the problem with a quota within the Conservative side is that you would be treated as a quota girl, which is Connie Faravanti's words, and you would be targeted because of that, and that there were so many other odds stacked against you that they didn't want that. And I thought about that. I thought, you know, maybe early on in the early 90s there were some issues around that, but you know, yeah, we play politics hard. I'm from the New South Wales, right? We play it harder than anyone. But you know, quota baiting is just not a thing. No party is free of these types of challenges. But to blame Labor for the eruption of claims that have been made by Liberal female MPs, I think is a bit far. And, you know, sure, Karina raises the question of whether you should have quotas in other areas. I want to say two things about quotas. One, I don't care if the Liberal Party has them or not, or adopts whatever strategy they want. I'm not here to tell the Liberal Party how they should, you know, address their issues. I can only say that Labor adopted a quota system and it worked. Quota systems don't put in place, they don't deny people of merit a spot to give it to a person without merit. They force an organization to look for merit in places they haven't been looking before. That's what they do. And so it was a change of behavior that came about. Secondly, sure, you can talk about quotas for other portions of the population, and maybe in time various organizations, corporate Australia or political parties might do that. I would point out, you know, amongst our female MPs, we've got people like Linda Burney and Anne Ali and Lisa Singh. You know, it's not as if we don't have people of colour in our parliamentary delegations. And, you know, I won't bore you with the list of firsts that have come from the Labor Party when it comes to a range of ethnic and cultural backgrounds.
Eugenie, can I bring you in here? Because we'll come back to quotas in a minute. But how do you see what's been going on, particularly in the Liberal Party? I mean, if you go back to Don's party, wasn't there that line that the woman didn't, when this was in the 70s, the woman didn't want to join Labor because it reminded her of sort of sweaty singlets, and you know, that was when the CWA was out there, and you know, women were really driving the Liberal National Party. What's changed?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think the problem is political life comes with high trade-offs, and we can't deny those trade-offs exist. It requires a lot of politicians now, long working hours, a lot of nasty attacks from the public, intense media scrutiny. So in some ways, and arguably it's worse than it was decades ago in terms of scrutiny and public abuse. So in a way, it's not surprising that talented, capable women, and men for that matter, are put off the prospect of entering politics. But going back to whether the low representation of women matters, I think to the general Australian public, yes, I think it does. I think they do look at the low representation of women in the Liberal Party, and there's a question mark for them there. Having said that, I think we have to be careful about overstating the consequences, because polling shows that primary support for the coalition is similar among men and women, and it's the same for the Labor Party. So I think Karina's right that people primarily look at what their politicians stand for and their policies rather than their gender.
And what do you think about trying to address this? You know, let's look for the solutions with quotas or at least targets for the Liberal Party.
Look, I am quite cautious about the prospect of quotas, because yes, they will boost the number of women in the parliament, but they won't necessarily address some of the underlying problems, which arguably are more
where
important.
This is actually the bigger problem at the moment for the Liberals?
Again, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think the lack of women is actually symptomatic of the underlying problem of a lack of meritocracy in the way that candidates are pre-selected.
And if you like, you can see the whole of that panel discussion online at yourmoney.com.au/politics shortly. That's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, top banking analyst Brian Johnson from CLSA on the day that the final Hayne report on the Royal Commission into Financial Services is handed to the government. Thanks for your company.